Have you ever been handed something that took decades to earn, wrapped in a piece of paper nobody in the room expected to survive? I'm Martin Ashby, 61 years old, and on a rainy October afternoon, my parents did something my brother had spent 11 years making certain they would never do. The deed was already on the table when I walked in. The house at 7741, Caldwell Road, had been in our family since 1974. My brother had lived in it rent-free for 11 years. And here's what none of them knew about what happened next. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge, where the steadiest hand wins every time. If you've ever sacrificed while someone took the credit, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. My name is Martin Ashby. I am 61 years old, and I spent 22 years as a shift supervisor at the Boardman Pole and Paper Mill on 47th Street in Boardman, Ohio. I started on the floor in 1991 at 28, running the night shift by 32, and I held the supervisor position until I retired 3 years ago. The mill ran 3 shifts. Mine ran on time. In 22 years, I showed up late once. February 14th, 2003, when Carol went into labor 6 weeks early, and I called from the hospital parking lot at 5:44 a.m., and my floor lead said not to worry about it. Carol died on March 8th, 2021, from a cardiac event while she was making coffee in the kitchen at 4812 Southern Boulevard, the house we had owned together since 1998. She was 58 years old. I was in the backyard. I heard the cup fall. That is all I will say about that morning, because some things belong to the person who was there and nowhere else. My parents, Earl and Norma Ashby, bought the house at 7741 Caldwell Road in Boardman in 1974. The year I was born. My father worked at the same mill I would later supervise on the maintenance crew for 31 years. My mother kept the house and raised 2 boys and worked the register at the Boardman Sparkle Market every Saturday morning for 12 years because the money mattered and she did not complain about things that mattered. The house was a 3-bedroom ranch on a corner lot with a covered porch my father built himself in 1981. The roof was replaced in 1994. The furnace was replaced in 2008. Every repair that house ever needed, someone in our family put their hands on. Douglas is my younger brother. He is 55 years old, and he has spent most of his adult life in a series of arrangements that sounded reasonable at the time and did not work out as planned. He moved back into the Caldwell Road house in 2012 after his second business venture dissolved and his apartment lease ended at the same time. He told our parents it would be temporary. That was 11 years before the story begins. In those 11 years, Douglas paid no rent, contributed nothing to property taxes, and performed no substantive maintenance. He mowed the lawn occasionally. He told our parents he was keeping an eye on things. He told anyone who asked that he was taking care of them, which was a version of a truth that depended entirely on what you meant by the word care. I was the one who paid the property taxes on 7741 Caldwell Road for 6 consecutive years, $4,847 per year, transferred to Mahoning County Treasurer's office on the 1st of March each year, without my parents asking and without Douglas acknowledging it. I covered the roof replacement in 2018, when the estimate came back at $11,200, and my father called me on a Sunday night at 6:22 p.m. with a number in his voice, like a weight he was embarrassed to carry. I called the contractor the following morning and gave him my card number before my father knew I had done it. When Carol died, I kept sending money home, $600 a month, transferred to my mother's account on the 1st of every month for the 9 years that followed. Not because they asked, because the furnace at Caldwell Road was 20 years old and the water heater had been making a sound since 2019 that I did not trust. The property tax notice for 2022 arrived in my mailbox at Southern Boulevard in February. I had asked the county to copy me on all notices for 7741 Caldwell Road in 2017 after Douglas missed the second quarter payment and said he hadn't seen the bill. My throat tightened reading the balance due, not from the amount, from what it represented. 11 years of a man treating someone else's asset as his own while the people who owned it aged quietly in a house that was no longer being maintained the way it deserved. I drove to Caldwell Road on a Saturday in March. The porch my father built in 1981 had a board missing from the second step. The gutters along the north side were full of November debris from the previous fall, still packed in March. The back door lock had been replaced with a hardware store deadbolt that didn't quite seat. Douglas's truck was in the driveway. He came to the door in a T-shirt at 10:11 a.m. and looked at me the way people look at a thing they have not prepared for. The deed to 7741. Caldwell Road was a document I had first seen in my father's filing cabinet in 1994, when I helped him organize his records after the roof repair. It was 2 pages, typed, filed with Mahoning County in 1974. I knew what it said. I had known for 30 years. My hands went still holding the memory of it. Renata came into the house around noon that Saturday. She was pleasant and organized in a way that made me pay attention to what she was organizing. She mentioned twice how much Douglas had done for my parents. She mentioned once that my parents were lucky to have someone right here. She said the standing in a kitchen that had not been cleaned to the standard my mother kept it for 40 years, and my jaw tightened once, and I let it pass. The conversation about the house came that evening at dinner, after my parents had been moved to the assisted living facility at Canfield Senior Residences in April 2022. By the fall of that year, my father's cognition had declined enough that long conversations were difficult. My mother was clearer. She was the one who said it. The transition to Canfield had cost $8,500 in initial deposit and placement fees, which I paid to Eugene Hartley, the placement coordinator at Canfield Senior Residences. On April 3rd, 2022, at 2:31 p.m. Douglas had said he would contribute half. He had not. My mother called me on October 9th at 6:22 p.m. She said she and my father had talked about the house. She said they had made a decision. She said she needed me to come to Canfield that week. I drove to Canfield on October 12th. I sat across from my parents at the table in their room, which smelled of the cedar sachets my mother had kept in her closets since I was a child. My father's hands were on the table. He looked at me and said, "We know what you've done, Martin. We know all of it." We talked to Russell. Russell Vance was my parents' property attorney, Vance & Associates, on Market Street in Youngstown, a precise man with 30 years of real estate experience who had handled my parents' affairs since 1997. He had, I learned that afternoon, been contacted by my mother in August, after Douglas asked her to sign a document that Russell had reviewed and advised her not to sign. My mother had not told Douglas. She had called Russell. She had not told Douglas anything. Russell Vance prepared the deed transfer. My parents signed on October 14th, a Saturday, at 9:14 a.m. in Russell's office on Market Street in Youngstown. My name went on the deed as sole owner. Russell notarized it himself. My chest held something it had not held in a long time, not triumph, the specific weight of a thing settling into its correct position after years of being slightly off-level. My hands were flat on the arms of the chair, and I did not move them. Patricia Morse, county recorder at Mahoning County, filed the certified deed at 11:47 a.m. on October 15th. The transfer was public record by noon. I drove to 7741 Caldwell Road at 7:08 a.m. on October 16th. I parked in the driveway behind Douglas's truck. The October light was low and flat, the kind that makes everything on a Boardman morning look like it has been there a very long time. The porch step was still missing its board. I looked at it for a moment. My father had built that porch in 1981 with a circular saw and a level and 3 Saturdays in July. I went inside. Douglas was in the kitchen. Renata was not there. He looked up from the table and then at the envelope in my hand. I set it on the table. The envelope contained 2 items. The first was a certified copy of the deed, filed October 15th, showing 7741. Caldwell Road transferred to Martin Ashby as sole owner, with the notarized signatures of Earl Ashby and Norma Ashby on page 2. The second was a formal 60-day notice to vacate, prepared by Russell Vance, dated October 15th, giving Douglas until December 7th to remove his belongings and return the property in a condition consistent with its documented state at the time of his occupancy. I didn't answer when Douglas said my name. He picked up the deed. He read the first page. His color changed. The particular change that moves from the jaw upward when something you have spent years constructing reveals its own weight all at once. His hands held the paper, without moving. "Martin," he said. I kept my voice level. "Russell Vance's number is on the cover page." I said, "He'll answer questions about the timeline." "This isn't. Mom and Dad wouldn't." "They did," I said. "October 14th. You can call the recorder's office if you want to verify the filing." Something in my chest folded inward and then held. Not satisfaction. Something quieter, the specific sensation of a completed calculation. I had spent 22 years on overnight shifts reading process gauges, watching for the numbers that told you what was actually happening inside a machine versus what the surface suggested. I knew the difference between a reading that looked stable and one that was. Douglas had looked stable for 11 years. The reading had never matched. I let that settle. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said he needed to call Renata. I told him the notice was self-explanatory and that I would be back on December 7th. I picked up my jacket and walked out. The porch step was still missing its board. I went back to my truck and got my toolbox. I had the board replaced in 40 minutes. I used screws instead of nails because screws hold longer, and my father had taught me that in 1981 on that same porch, and I had not forgotten. I drove home to Southern Boulevard at 3:44 p.m. Douglas called 4 times on October 16th after I left. I did not answer. He called twice on October 17th. On October 19th, he called my mother at Canfield at 10:14 a.m. She listened for 6 minutes, my mother told me afterward, and then she said, "Douglas, Russell handled it correctly. We made our decision." She said it in the voice she had used when we were boys and a conversation was over. He called a property attorney in Youngstown, not Russell Vance, on October 22nd. That attorney sent a letter on October 28th referencing adverse possession, which is a legal doctrine that requires open, hostile, continuous, exclusive, and actual possession of property for a specific statutory period without the owner's permission. My throat went dry reading that letter, not from concern, from the specific dryness that arrives when you recognize a badly constructed argument deployed in desperation. I called Russell Vance at 2:14 p.m. on October 28th. He had already seen the letter. He said, "Martin, they paid the taxes. You have records of 6 consecutive years of transfers in your name as authorized agent. Adverse possession requires possession without the owner's consent. Your parents consented to his residency explicitly." He said this with the calm of a man who has seen this argument before and knows exactly where it ends. On day 58, December 5th, a Tuesday, Douglas opened the certified letter that Russell had sent as a formal follow-up at 10:03 a.m. I know this because the delivery confirmation came to my phone. I was at the mill, not working, just walking the old property line on the south side of 47th Street, where I had spent 22 years, the way you sometimes go back to a place to close a chapter that has been open too long. December 7th arrived on a Thursday. Douglas's truck was gone from the driveway. The house was empty. The kitchen was clean. The back door lock had been replaced. A proper deadbolt, seated correctly. I did not know if Douglas had done it or if Renata had, and it did not matter. I walked through every room. The house smelled like cedar and old wood, and the particular warmth of the structure that had been standing for 50 years and intended to stand for 50 more. My parents had built something here that was worth protecting. I had protected it the only way I knew how, by being the person who showed up when the numbers said something was wrong. The person who shows up every day gets remembered. The person who shows up when it matters gets trusted. My parents knew the difference. They always had. Martin Ashby, 61 years old, and the deed to 7741. Caldwell Road is in the second drawer of the filing cabinet at 4812 Southern Boulevard, next to Carol's photographs and the receipt for the 2018 roof. The smell of cedar. A porch step that finally held. A filing cabinet with the right name on the deed. When the person who did nothing finally had to leave, what do you think was harder for them? Packing their things or admitting they never owned any of it? If this story reached something in you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.